the voice of the San Francisco 49ers. But let's not forget that there's maybe nobody on earth that knows more about the Raider franchise than Greg Papa, and I hope he does not mind as we say good morning to him. Me asking, because we do have a lot of Raider fans, and I know you still have a lot of affinity for that franchise. Did it surprise you that Mr. Mark Davis made the moves when he made the moves?
Mark has very few of the great qualities of his dad, but the one that he does have is a vicious temper. So their performance on Monday Night Football, and specifically because Mark really doesn't know the intricacies of the game like his dad, the offensive performance and the way Jimmy was pummeled in that game, and he took that one shot on his left knee. I didn't think he was going to get up, but he kept playing, and then he missed Devontae on the stutter and go. And so for casual fans, that's obvious to see. Is, bench Jimmy and fire the offensive guy and get rid of everybody. So from that standpoint, no. But these guys are a year and a half into a 6-year contract.
Yeah.
And my God, the amount of money. Al never liked to pay coaches beyond their role. Even, if they were under contract, assistant coaches, he would work them until whatever the date said, February 1st. He'd work them right then and then fire them after that. He wanted to get his, bang for his buck. So from that standpoint, it is not surprising at all that he was angry and just couldn't get over it and decided to, cannonball the whole organization. What's shocking to me, and I don't know if there's anybody else on earth but me even knows the story, but for them to name Antonio Pierce the interim head coach is beyond me. So at the end of Al's life, he had a very hard time moving. He was confined to a wheelchair, and getting out of off the charter was hard for him. And he couldn't. He also, those long flights to the East Coast, 6 hours long. He had to get up and go to the bathroom, and it took 3 guys to get him up. And he hated to do it in front of the whole team and show weakness. So there was one trip. He asked me to come on his private charter. He hardly ever did that. I can't think more than 1 or 2 times he ever flew separate from the team. But so he calls me and says, we fly with me tomorrow. We're going to New York, fly in my charter. So we go. And it's just me and Jim Plunkett, Tom Flores, and Al. And Al and I sat up in the front and talked the whole time. And we were going to play the Giants. And their middle linebacker then was Antonio Pierce. And Antonio Pierce said to the media that week, the New York Giants could beat the Raiders with 10 guys on defense. And Al he called me up. Look at this quote. Do you believe what he said? He was so angry that he said it, but more than anything, it was just so incredibly disappointing to him that somebody from the other team would say his team is so weak they could play with one less guy. So it really bothered him. I mean, he had feuds with so many people in his life, but this one was different. So I don't know if Mark Davis has any knowledge of what Antonio Pierce said about his dad's team, but I do. And it's just amazing to me that Antonio Pierce in any way is connected with the Raiders, and now he's the interim head coach of the Raiders. I hope Al's not watching.
Wow.
That's an amazing story.
For real. I mean, first, okay, that is an amazing story, full stop. Also, we've been in the business a long time. I get it. We get put in spots. You're on a private plane with Al Davis and Jim Plunkett, and who is the other one? I'm sorry?
Tom Flores.
Tom Flores, yeah, sorry.
Hall of Flamer,
Tom
Flores.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just Tom Flores. You're on a plane with Al Davis, Tom Flores, and Jim Plunkett sitting up front talking to Al Davis the entire trip.
Honestly, I think Plunkett and Tom were sleeping in the back. Al called me up right. He would often, even on the Raider charter, he would call me up right away and in front of the whole team want to talk about the team. Sometimes it was embarrassing because he would get mad. And I could tell after a certain game, every game, when we had a tough loss on the road, I tried to avoid him. I didn't want to go near him. But about an hour into the flight, Butch, his security guard, would come back. Mr. Davis wants to talk to you. So I go up, and then I remember one time we had a really hard road game somewhere, and Rob Ryan was the defensive coordinator, and Al was just so pissed at Rob Ryan. So with Rob Ryan sitting right across the aisle from Al, he's talking loud to me, like, what am I going to do with this defensive coordinator? He's screaming right in front of him. And he's just like, he's going on and on. I go, I don't know, Al, why don't you take him into the town square and tar and feather him? If you can do that, or have a public shooting. It was so loud. I couldn't avoid, it was so embarrassing. Like, can you have this talk in private? But that's just the way he was. And that flight to New York was just so ingrained in me. There were some moments in his life when he was really down. And for a guy on another team, before the game even started, to say that about his team, he was just, it was the emotion wasn't, he was angry and pissed, and how, who's he to say that? But it was more, wow, he thinks that low of my team, that's what he thinks. So I texted Paul Gutierrez and gave him the story. Hopefully Paul will ask Antonio Pierce about that. And, I don't know Antonio Pierce. Throughout every locker room he's been in, he's supposed to be a great leader, and people gravitate towards him. And obviously he moved up to be a interim head coach in the NFL. So I'm sure he's a powerful presence, but I wonder if he knows what his words did to the late, great owner of the Raiders at that time in his life.
Talk with Greg Papa here. Another reference in that all of this was a connection between the Raiders and the Niners. You mentioned Jimmy G. He's getting benched. What's his future in the NFL?
I don't know. People just look at the quarterback position and, wow, what a great coach Kyle is. He gets something out of Jimmy. And that's all true. But Jimmy's, first of all, he has been pummeled, just pummeled. Every single game that I've watched, he just gets pounded. What the Bills did to him in the second week, that Pittsburgh game on Sunday Night Football, it's just nonstop. He's been hurt every game, and he's missing practice time. People don't realize how valuable practice time is, especially for a quarterback and a new set of wide receivers. And Jimmy didn't work with these guys in the off season because he was coming off the existing ankle injury from the end of his Niner days last year. He had to have surgery. So there's a complete disconnect. And then, the line is just not their offensive line. It's not the days of shell up Shaw and Otto, to be sure, and they're just getting pummeled. So I don't know. I would say I think he'll come back and play again this year. Aidan O'Connell is a good young quarterback. He could be, I don't want to say Brock Purdy, but he could be that kind of guy. We saw him in training camp when we had the joint practice with them and Henderson, and then in the game itself, he was phenomenal. He just got the ball out on time. I mean, the guy just processes. Like Brock, he's a natural quarterback. He sees it, he rips it. So he could play, but I would think there's going to be a point where they'll go back to Jimmy at some point. But if not, you tell me. I think they're on the hook for him one more year next year, contractually. So. Yeah. But it's a 3-year deal, but essentially it's a 2-year. So they could just release him. I mean, you tell me who's going to be their coach next year. Is it going to be Jim Harbaugh?
Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. That's another story. Al was grooming. Now, Mark's done a lot of things that go completely 180 degrees from his dad, but Jim Harbaugh's not one. Al was grooming Jim Harbaugh to be the coach of the Raiders for a long time, and then Jim went to USC and Stanford, and then the Niners just simply paid him more money. Al spoke to Harbaugh about being the Raider coach the day the Niners hired him, but he wasn't going to pay him that kind of money. Just not in his DNA to pay a coach that much money. But anyway, Harbaugh, what do you like of Garoppolo as a stopgap? Could they ever get the draft rights to Caleb Williams or finagle him to Vegas? That's one of the teams he's mentioned. Would they bring Lincoln Riley? I don't know. But as far as Jimmy goes, I hope he gets on the field this year. Otherwise, I think it's possible he's looking, even if the Raiders are paying him a big balloon payment to go away, he may be looking at, going to camp somewhere next year as a backup quarterback.
How much, in your opinion, I know this is supposed to be Niners talk, but this is just so fascinating, Greg. Anytime you tell stories, and no one knows this, like I said, franchise better than you. You mentioned that Mark and Al differ in many ways, but not on Jim Harbaugh. In your opinion, in your experience, how much does Al's, not his legacy, but wanting to be like his dad, wanting to do like this is what dad would have done. That type of thought process. Does that permeate Mark's decision-making process, in your opinion, or is he the I want out of my dad's shadow type of guy, or a combination of both? I'm just asking.
Going back, I never said that. I've never spoken to Mark Davis about Jim Harbaugh ever.
Oh, I'm
never.
sorry.
Okay. I don't know if he knows him, or I'm just saying Al loved Jim Harbaugh.
Gotcha. Okay.
He hired him as quarterback coach. Jim's first job in the NFL was when Gruden left and Al traded them to Tampa. They needed a quarterback coach for Rich Gannon. So Mark Trestman was hired as the offensive coordinator. And I think Mark was the quarterback coach. He went up to OC. They hired Harbaugh. Harbaugh was green. And Harbaugh was a completely different guy. He and I would run around on the road together. And when he became a head coach, he changed. But anyway, Al just had an affinity for Harbaugh because he was a player. Al loved ex-players. And he wanted them to learn to call plays and all that. But he didn't want them to go. When Harbaugh left to become the head coach at University of San Diego, Al could not get it. He's like, why? And Harbaugh told him, I want to be a head coach. I want to learn. He goes, Al was working with the Chargers when he was young, left and went to was working in pro football, left and went to University of Southern California to become a recruiting guy. And Harbaugh said, you left and went to college and came back. And Al said, I went to USC. Not USD. There's a big difference there. So anyway, Al was grooming him, but he wasn't going to pay him. It's right when he hired Hugh Jackson as head coach. Anyway, as far as Mark, I think he makes every decision separately. There are some that his dad would make. There are some that his dad wouldn't make. And I don't know how close he was with his dad. Honestly, his dad could be really rough with him. Yeah. So I don't know if he values that at all. I think he, with the Hall of Fame and all that, and Al's desire for that, certainly he does. But let's face it, the reason I'm no longer working for the Raiders is because Mark made decisions that his dad would not only be against, he would be appalled by. Interviewing Mike Shanahan to be the coach of the Raiders, you think Al would be on board with that? No. Having Marcus Allen light his eternal flame torch, which is a symbol of Al's life. Not just retiring Marcus's number, which they don't do, but he did a couple of things that I know Al would. I would the one time when they had him light his torch, I said, "You better make sure he's dead. You hit that torch button and he's alive. The whole thing's going to go up in flames." So, but there's some things he does that I think Al would. The whole Vegas thing. Al loved Vegas. He used to have all his birthday parties there. So I don't think he consciously decides, oh, my dad would love that or my dad would hate that. I think there are times he doesn't really care what his dad would do. He's got to do what he does, and which is fine. But there's some things that are so personal, like Mike Shanahan, obviously Marcus Allen, and I'm sure he has no knowledge of this Antonio Pierce thing. But when I heard the name Antonio Pierce as the Raider coach, I was like, wow. The irony in that is just dripping. Unbelievable.
Greg, I want to go back to you getting called, summoned basically by Al's security to get you up to the front of the plane. Is he talking to you? Is he venting to you? Is he asking for your input? Like, kind of how is that going?
Yeah, a lot of times it was. He would just get on the plane, and when he was younger, he'd walk on, and he was fine, and he just had a look. I just tried never to make eye contact with him ever. I mean, after a game. Because it was the Al evil eye, and it was evil. When he lost a game, he was possessed. So it was, I didn't want to be around him. And I didn't want to, he asked my opinion on certain specific plays and things. How to look upstairs would be what he'd say. And then, the coaches were all sitting right there. And Al would, whenever he was upset about something, which was all the time, he'd be upset with his coaches. He very seldom would be upset with players because he loved his players. He's the one who picked them all. So he'd blame the coaches. So it was, and they're all sitting there with him. I can't imagine sitting up there in that plane for 5-6 hours flying home with Al Davis after a loss. My God, I'd rather get tarred and feathered, I think. I mean, that would be just beyond. He is an evil man when he loses a football game. So a lot of it was just, what I saw upstairs on certain plays. Can you believe we did this? Why didn't we do that? What do I do with this guy? And blah, blah, blah. But then, a lot of times he would call me after practice a lot late in his life. He just, he couldn't make every single practice. And the few ones that he would miss, he'd call me and ask me what he saw at practice. So, but yeah, it was mainly just about the football team and how they performed or didn't perform. And he'd be critical of his coaches.
I can't believe I've never asked you this, Greg, and the world of love and respect I have for you to know that I mean this. Did you ever consider leaving play-by-play, leaving broadcasting, and actually working football like full time?
Oh yeah, for 5 years I considered it. From 2006 to 11, he wanted me to come work for him.
What stopped?
We had many money. He didn't pay me enough money.
Okay, okay,
that's a good answer.
That's a really good answer.
He paid me an insulting. He offered me an insulting amount of money one time. I was like, hell, I make more money doing 50 San Francisco Giants games than this. How do you expect me to walk away from? And I was going to do it because it was fun. It'd be something to try,
Sure.
We all play, when I'm coaching, when I'm broadcasting a game, I'm pretending I'm coaching. When I'm on the radio Monday through Friday, they traded for Chase Young when I do that. And you pretend you're a GM. So it'd be nice to try it. At first I thought, I don't have the background in that. How could I ever do that? And Bruce Allen, Bruce sat me down, and Bruce was a player agent. Scotty Sterling up in Sacramento, the great Scotty Sterling. He had no background. He worked for Al for years. Ron Wolf. Al hired him in the 60s because he had an incredible memory. And look at Ron Wolf. He's a Hall of Fame executive. Groomed by Al, but worked for the Packers. I talked to Ron Wolf about it for a long time. He gave me some great advice about that. He said to me, you realize Al Davis has never made a mistake in his life. So if something goes wrong, it's your fault. So it was one of those deals,
Right.
So so it was hard. No, we went back and forth. He did. I remember one Sunday going over to meet him at the Hilton, where he was living at the end of his life by the Oakland airport, and we had a long talk. I think the reason we got along so well is I could just talk to him. He reminded me a lot of my father. In fact, he and my father were close whenever they would interact. It was like two old buddies. I don't know. And but my dad's very different than Al Davis. But anyway, I didn't have any problem disagreeing with him. I don't know. I just didn't. But respectfully, he and I never had words. One time he snapped at me and said, "You're so effing dumb." And I was like, that's why I'm not going to work for you. That's never going to work.
Right.
I'll quit. I'm not going to. So anyway, it was basically money. I would have done it. I would loved to have done it. I actually spoke to Mark about it because Mark knew after his dad died, but he wasn't going to do that. He was going to go a different way. He actually offered me a job for like 6 months that year, but I was making too much money in broadcasting, or more money, that wasn't worth it. And one time Al called me and snapped at me about when he was getting close to hiring me. He said, "You have 5 kids? You're never going to work here. You're going to be at Little League practice at 7 o'clock at night. You're not going to be here burning the midnight oil." I'm like, I'll take care of my kids. We went back and forth.
Sure.
So honestly, it's probably the biggest regret of my life that I never got a chance to do it.
Really?
But honestly, it probably would not have worked out well because he was at the end of his life. He didn't live very much longer after that. He never thought he was going to die. This was all about the succession plan and who would run the team after he was gone. And he really never had one. So when he died, his wife, Carol, and Mark just took it. And that's kind of what he wanted to do from an ownership standpoint. But he just never thought he would die. I spoke to him. I think that he had a mild operation on the Wednesday he died. I think it was like Monday of that week. He had died. We spoke. So he just never thought he was going to die. So that was part of it. But yeah, I do think about it often of those years. But for 5 solid years from 06 to like 11, I really backed off on a lot of broadcasting, or even earlier. I guess it was earlier. But anyway, yeah, we came close. We had many, many meetings about it, hours of meetings. And He offered me money, but again, it just came down to Al Davis is cheap, I guess, is what the bottom line is.
What was the role going to be?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
General manager.
What?
The GM.
What?
Well, it would never have been called that because
Sure.
What did he say? He had I got notes on my desk here. Overseer. I don't know what he had. He was the general manager. Like Bruce Allen was never general manager.
Right.
Bruce was, the special assistant to the owner or something like that. It would have been something like that. He, just run the locker room. Touch every player every day, be involved with him on player acquisition. Be his right hand man as far as so it'd be like Al's the GM, but he knew that he was, and he had people close to him. John Kingdon was with him till he died. And John and I were very close. John was my statistician in the booth all those years, so John was really close. So John was involved in all that. So there wasn't a formal title. I do have it in my desk here. I saved all those notes. Overseer or something like that. I don't know what I was overseeing. But just being around the team and the liaison really between the coaching staff, the players, and him. Because, that's the biggest role, is to keep peace between the head coach and the coaching staff, and especially the defensive coordinator and Al. Because Al's brutal on all coaches, but, man, he is tough on defensive coordinators. Because he was a D-line coach. So, the defensive, that's the worst job in American sport, was being the defensive coordinator for Al Davis.
Look, what a perfect way to spend the bye week. We're out of time. We actually went a double segment. Thank you, Greg, but we just couldn't help sit back. And, we always love listening to your stories and listening to you talk about football history in general. But thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I'm sure you've had this offer before. I'm sure you've thought about it before. You're a busy guy. You ever want to write a book about Al Davis and you need a ghostwriter just to sit there and transcribe? I am your guy. You pay me $5. You can pay me Al Davis style. Out $5, whatever you want.
So that's where. So right around the time he was talking about me working for him and everything.
Yeah.
His 80th birthday was coming up, which happened to be the 50th or 60th year, 50th year of the NFL. My years are kind of getting crazy here. Going back to the old AFL. Remember when they had that documentary, the colored football?
Yeah.
It was the 50th anniversary of the AFL. And Al, he did not like the way a lot of it was being portrayed, the history of the AFL. And Al's impact on the Oakland Raiders and the Los Angeles Raiders is profound, but really, it was the AFL, the merging of those leagues, which he was against, his feud with Pete Rozelle and Lamar Hunt. And so anyway, he wanted me to write his autobiography. He wanted me to write a book on him. And I have no background. I've read a few books, but I certainly have not written a book. So I'm like, I wouldn't even know how to start. But the point was we were working on long form interviews.
Yeah.
We went into his office and did hours and hours of interviews with him. And we got into every topic. And yes, the Marcus Allen situation, which is extremely delicate. He was going to share what happened with that. And then he backed away. He wouldn't do it. He got all upset. And when I pushed him on it, and then he gave me a book to read about it. And it's a very tangled situation. I'll leave it at that. And I have my own theories on that. But one summer, I guess that was, what was that, 09? Mm-hmm. The years are kind of blending together here. Anyway, it was the anniversary of the American Football League, coincided with Al's 80th birthday in that one year. And he was he was very, retrospectful at that time. And so that's where we spent hours and hours and hours together in his office, was researching and then actually on camera doing some interviews. Some are available online. He didn't look good at that point in his life. He had bandages all over his face. His fingers didn't work. I remember him, trying to have a glass of he loved soda whenever he's drinking Coke. His fingers didn't work well. It was just the image of it is tough for me. But anyway, he was working on that very thing. And there was a smaller book written by a writer down in LA that he brought in, but it was nothing like he wanted it to be. It was more of a pamphlet. But he wanted a full-blown Al Davis story. But I honestly, Dave, I wouldn't be, you'd have other people. John did write a book about him, and it was hilarious. The Raiders weren't real happy with it because it took, it was respectful of Al, but he told some stories about Al that were hilarious. One about Al's affinity for cheeseburgers. But anyway, that was kind of one summer was the major project. One off season was me doing these long form interviews with him, and then transposing all that into a book form or long interviews. And like so many things in Al's life, he was so distracted by his football team and never quite got done.
I'll just wrap up like this. Here's my pitch. Honestly, you get a former player, somebody you pick to do the forward. We write the introduction and the conclusion or the epilogue, and then you pick the 10 best stories, your 10 favorite stories or most important stories about Al. A blurb at the beginning of each chapter with the title of whatever the story is, and then just talk it into a microphone, transcribe it, and that 2 months, Greg, and the book's done. It should be told, and it would be an incredibly easy book to put together, and your encyclopedic memory and access and anecdotes of who the man really was. You've helped me. When I first met you, I was like, oh, Al Davis guy, he's this guy, what a weenie. I don't like this guy. I'm a Niner fan. Who the hell is that? And you've helped me so much through the years and understanding there's a whole different side to him. And I think that's worthy of that. Those stories are worthy of being told on a broader scale. That's my pitch. I'm telling you, $5.
I believe me. Yeah. But the only thing is I didn't meet Al Davis. I went to work for the Raiders in '97, so there was most of his dominant football life was, from the late '60s. That his '68 draft and '67.
And when did Mitch Albom meet Maury? That's the thing.
Well, I know.
I mean, I honestly don't know the answer.
So one of the funniest. The first time I met Al Davis, and I remember this well, he used to come to Clippers games with Donald Sterling. He'd sit there with Billy Crystal and who's that actor? Robbie Benson. Robbie Benson would sit there. So I would occasionally go over at halftime, Al would be in an all-white suit, and say hi to him and talk. He loved the NBA. Anyway, the first time I ever met him was at the old Oakland Coliseum Arena. The Warriors are playing the Pistons. He was a big Pistons guy. He's the one. Remember when Isaiah turned his ankle against the Lakers in the NBA Finals one year?
Yes.
They were in LA. They sent Isaiah over to the Raider facility to get his ankle worked on. Again, he had 25 points in the one quarter. And, Al loved the bad boy image of the Pistons and all that. But anyway, so it's halftime in the 90s. Warriors are playing the bad boy Pistons. Halftime, I walk back, up the tunnel in the locker room to go to the bathroom and to grab a cup of coffee. I pick up my head, and there's this guy in this all-white jumpsuit. I'm like, what? So he comes up to me, extends in his hands, and he says, Greg Papa, how are you? And I said, and you are, sir? Pretended like I didn't know who he was. And he laughed because he went to Syracuse, obviously. That's the very first time I ever met him before I went to work for him in '97. Quite a man. Many sides. He's absolutely your worst enemy. You had an enemy, you didn't want it to be Al Davis.
Sure.
Because he's going to go hard, but he also is your closest friend. So an amazing individual.
Well, look, I think at this point our corporate office is about to fire me for the segment, but you couldn't drag me out of it. Hey, Greg. Thank you. No. Thank you for one of the best, most incredibly interesting radio segments I've been a part of in a long, long time. What a great way to spend the bye week, and we'll be back at it next week ahead of the Niners and Jags. But thank you so much for opening up about all that, Greg. Seriously.
Yeah, we'll talk about Trent Baalke next week.
The Baalke years.
I'll get my knee braces on.
Riveting.
See you, buddy. Take care.
Take care, guys. Have a good week.
You too. I mean, we are way late, but my God.
Incredible stuff.
That was like, I got chills at some points too. So that was about as long a segment as we'll ever do. And we apologize for going so long, but I hope you enjoyed that half as much as we do. And I'm serious. He needs to write a book. That is a book and a half. We'll take a break. When we come back, celebrity birthdays.